One of the fundamental building blocks of the internet are hyperlinks, or for short, just links. So links are what actually enables the internet to be a World Wide Web. So without links between pages, there would be no web. And so let's now learn how to place links on our own web pages. Now we can place links into two big categories. The first category is links that point to other pages within our own website. So let's say that here in our website, the Code magazine, we had another blog post. So we could then create a link from this page to that other page, right? Now, on the other hand, the other category is links that point to outside of our website. So for example, if I placed a link to udemy.com here on this page, then that of course would be a link to the outside of our website, right? Now we do create these two types of links in the exact same way in HTML, but there's still some kinds of particularities that we need to be aware of. And so let's now actually start with the second kind of link that I was describing, which point outwards of our own website. So what I have here in the demo is that here at the end of this part, so of this what is HTML section, I have a link to the MDN web docs. So this is basically a website where you can learn all about HTML and also CSS and JavaScript. And actually, I will show you this site a little bit better in the next section, because it's important as a web developer to know how to use and find information here in this web documentations page. So what we want is to grab the link of that. And so to do that, just Google MDN, which stands for Mozilla Developer Network, and then just HTML. And the exact URL that we're going to use here doesn't really matter. All we want is to have some URL that points outside of our own page, right? So let's just grab this one here, which was the first Google result. So I'm copying it. And again, keep in mind that this is called a URL. So as you know, every single website on the internet has its own URL. And so that is what we need in order to create a link to that page. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, we want to put that right here after this unordered list, right? Let's see in the demo. Yeah, so right here after the ordered list. So that's here. So to create a link in HTML, we use the A element, which stands for anchor. So technically, a hyperlink or a link is actually called anchor in HTML. So it is an anchor element. We can close it. Then we can specify some content, and then we can, or we have to actually close it. So let's start by doing that. Now, as for the content of the link, what we specify here is actually the text that we want to be displayed on the page. So the text of the link. So in this case, that is this MDN web docs. All right, so MDN web docs. But now what about the URL where we want this link to point to? Well, for that we need to once again use an attribute. So in this case, it is the href attribute. Then equal, double quotes, and then we can simply paste that URL that we copied right here. And that's actually it. So if I give it a save now, and then reload our page here, then here is our link. And you see it down there, so here in this corner, that when I hover it, it actually shows me the URL. And then when I click it, our page goes there. Great. And so that is actually already the basics of creating a link. Very simple, right? Now we want this link here to actually be like inside of this text. So inside of one more paragraph here. right? So let's create that paragraph. So you can learn more at, and then this link here is basically just a continuation of the text in here. So inside of this paragraph. So we can finish our sentence here and then close up our paragraph as usual. And so now that looks just like in the original one, right? Now notice what happens here once again when I click it. So you see that we navigated directly to this page and now our own page disappeared. So of course we can go back here, but sometimes what we want to do is to open a link in a new tab. So let me also show you how we can do that. And of course we don't always want that. So many times we actually want the page to really move to the URL that we specified here, but also sometimes it's useful to keep the page open and simply open the URL in a new tab. And we can do that by specifying the target attribute, then the quotes as always, and then this one looks a bit weird, so it's underscore and then blank. So give that a save, and when we reload it will look the same, but the behavior should have changed. And indeed, notice how it opened a new tab and our original one is still open. Great, so that worked, and so we have now a link that points to a URL that is outside of our own website. But now about that first scenario where we want to link to an internal page, basically, let's do that now. And going back again to our demo, we have here this example. So in the very beginning, right after the main heading, we have these links here. And so these are supposed to be links that point to pages that are part of this blog. So let's now create this first link here, so blog, and also create a new page where we can actually link to. Okay, and so creating a new page is as simple as creating a new HTML document. So let's open up again our sidebar by clicking here, and then we see our Explorer here basically with all the files. And then again, we create a new file in this icon here, and let's call it blog.html this time. And now we could use this cheat here to create the HTML structure, but actually let's practice a little bit here again. And if you want, you can even pause the video and type it out on your own, but I will just do it here very fast now. So HTML, then we need to close it, of course. Now inside of the HTML, remember we have the head. Inside of the head, we have a title usually. And this one, let's just call it like this, blog. So just uppercase to make it really obvious. And you see that this is really just a very bare bones structure, just a head with a title. And actually the same for the body, which remember is the part that is going to be visible in the browser. So here I will simply specify an h2 element and close it also here. And let's call this one blog as well. Okay, we still need to close the body, of course. And that's it. Let's give it a save. And so here we have a very simple, very bare bones blog HTML document. But now with that in place, we can create a hyperlink or a link right here in this index.html, which will point to that blog.html. And so the browser will then navigate to that page. So let's do it right here after the h1. And so the anchor element, then we need the href. And so now what we do here, instead of specifying a URL, is to specify the name of the HTML file that we want to go to. And so in this case, it is of course this blog blog.html that we just created. Then here, as the content of the element, let's just write blog again, and then close it as always. Give it a save. Here is our beautiful link. And now watch what happens as I click it. Bam! We are now at blog. And you can see that also here in the URL bar. So which is now all of this file. And so all of this path. And then at the end, blog.html. Right? Now to go back, we could of course click here on this back button. But what we could also do is to add a link here which simply points back to index.html. Right? That sounds like a nice idea, doesn't it? So let's come back here to blog.html, and as yet another challenge, now I want you to actually create this link on your own. So pause the video here and create a link that points back to index.html. So, did you manage to do that? Or at least try it? Well, I sure hope so. But anyway, of course we use the A element again, then we specify href, and well, to go back, we just say index.html. And then here we can specify any text, which I didn't tell you which one, because it doesn't really matter. Let's just say back to home, or something like that. Give it a save. And now once we reload it, we have our link, we can click it. And so now we can basically go back and forth between these two pages because they're now connected through these links. So we can go to the blog, we can go back and forth, and so on and so forth. All right. So let's close up this one here. We don't need it anymore. And just to finish, we can also actually specify a link that doesn't go anywhere. So let me show that to you as well. So let's just write the content first. And here I have challenges, I think, in the demo. So we have challenges, Flexbox, and CSS grid. So that's challenges. But watch what happens now when I reload the page like this. So you see that it only says challenges, but notice how it's just normal text. It's not blue and not underlined, so it's clearly not a link, right? So even though it is actually an anchor element. But what makes an anchor element really a link is the href property. And so we really need to specify it. Otherwise, it is not a link at all. It is then just an anchor, which is not really useful. Now, but what if we don't want this to point anywhere, as I was saying? Well, the solution to that is to specify this hash symbol right here, right? So if I now save it and reload, then we are back to this being a link, actually. It just doesn't point anywhere. What happens when you click on this link is that basically it goes back to the top of this current page, okay? And a little bit later in the course, we will actually make use of this behavior. But for now, I just want you to know that this is how we can specify links when we don't have any URL yet for them or don't have any page. So basically, this is like a placeholder link. Okay, and so let's just copy this here twice. There's no need to write it again. But of course, if you want, you can write it again. So just for this Flexbox and CSS grid. So just to make that navigation look a bit more like complete. But all of these links, they should not point anywhere. Okay, and this is how you specify links or hyperlinks or anchors, as we can also call them, in HTML. So this is a really important part of the web, as I said in the very beginning. And so make sure that you understand how they work and how we place them inside our own web pages. So we already learned a couple of very important HTML elements and are already able to create a nice page with some nice functionality as well. But now it's time to actually add some structure to our document and to our elements. And so let's now learn a couple of new HTML5 elements for that. Now, when I said that the page is lacking some structure, what I meant is that all of these elements that we placed in our document, they're all simply like appearing one after another here, right? They're not really like distinguished from one another, and especially they're not like grouped together in any logical way. And so let's change that by creating some container elements which will then group these elements together. So one of the things that first come to mind is these links here. So we have all of these links, and this kind of looks like a page navigation here, right? So a page navigation is usually what we want when we have a couple of links at the top of a page. And so what we can do is to specify a special element and then place all the links into that element. And the element that I mean is called nav. So nav, which stands for navigation. So just like this. And now these need to be indentated, or they should be at least. And so when I give it a save, then Prettier formats this automatically. And now these 4 links are nicely grouped into this container here. So into this parent element, which is a navigation. Now, the thing is that when we now update our page, it does look exactly the same. So all that happens here is that this basically created like an invisible box, which now contains these elements. Okay, so the element on itself doesn't do anything. All it does is to group these elements together. And I understand that right now it doesn't really seem intuitive or logical to be doing this, but trust me, once we reach the section where we build some layouts, and actually also in the next section just on CSS, it will be very important to have all these different parts inside of their own containers. All right. So looking at our page, basically this is now the navigation, and this here is the heading. Then after that, we have all of this here, which is basically our post, so our blog post, right? So this is kind of different than this top part. So all of this is the blog post again, and this is like the top part of our web page. So what we can do is to group this navigation and the heading into a header element. All right, so let's do that. So this is another HTML5 element, which is called header. And the header basically means the top part of a web document, or it can also mean the top part of some smaller unit, as we will actually see in a minute. And anyway, this is just an introduction to these HTML5 elements. We will use them even more, and I will explain them even more when we build our big website project a little bit later in this course. Okay, so again, nothing will have changed visually, but now we told the browser, like, hey, all of this here is our web page header. So it's the top part of our page. Then all of this, as I mentioned before, starting here is the main part of the page, which is in this case a blog post. And a very common element that we can use for a blog post is the article element. So this is yet another container element, but this time it's one for an article. An article in this context actually does not simply mean a written article like this, but it can also be like things from the real world. Like a computer is an article, or a pen, or a phone. So all of these are articles, and if somehow we needed to represent a computer in HTML, then an article would also be a good element for that. Okay, and so now basically our body has only 2 direct child elements. We only have a header and we have an article, which is when we look at our page, really all we have. So we have the header and we have all of the rest, which is our article. So that is now nicely placed inside of its own box. Now, one thing that you might ask, well, if these boxes, all of them don't do anything, then why don't we call all of them just nav, or all of them header, or all of them article? So this one could also be article and nothing would change on the page, right? However, we don't do that for something called semantic HTML, and I will explain briefly what that means in the next video. But now, continuing even further, we can actually do some more grouping here inside of our article. So notice how we have kind of this top part here of the article. So basically the heading, the author here, and also the image. So this is kind of the top part of our article. And then here we have the content itself, right? And so once again, notice how I said that this is like the top part of the article. So just like this here is the top part of the entire web page. So what that means is that here again, we should use a header element to basically mark that up. And by marking up, I mean to basically describe the content in a better way. So as I just said, inside of the article, we want to also have a header. So inside of that header, there should be this heading, this author image, the author name, and then here this image. Okay, and then closing it. Now all of this is of course a little bit subjective as well. So what seems very logical here to me might not be as logical for other developers. But I think that what we just did here up until this point is quite logical for everyone and makes sense. So again, this one here is the header part of the article. And with this, we gave our article a little bit more structure. So we have the header, and only after that, then comes the rest of the content. Okay, so this is looking quite nice already. But finally, if we look at our demo here, there's actually one thing missing. And in fact, there's multiple things. So we don't have these related posts yet, but we will take care of that later. But we also have this part here at the bottom. So it's this copyright notice here. And this kind of content that comes at the very end of a page is what we usually call the footer. And so there's actually, as you might have guessed, a special element for that as well in HTML5. So footer, and then let's close it also like this. And now let's grab actually the text from here. Actually, it's not here. So we have to just write it manually. And now here we have two options. So to write this text, we could create a paragraph and then put that text in there. Or we could actually also write the text right here into this footer. Okay. And this is, in fact, what I will do now. So in this case, there is just no need here to create yet another paragraph because it's going to be the only child of this footer element here anyway. And so there's no need then. So copyright. And now here you see this copyright symbol, which I'm sure you know. So how do we create that? Well, this is something called an HTML entity. So actually this is something new. So let me show you quickly how we do that. So we write an ampersand like this. And then in this case, I already know the name of the character that I want. So I can just start writing copy. And so then I can select this one here, or I can just write the semicolon and then we're done. So this HTML entity here is what represents this C here. Okay. And there are entire tables for HTML entities, and I have one on my resources page. I think I haven't mentioned that resources page yet, but there is a link to it in the very first text lecture in the first section, and also in the GitHub repository that I showed you in one of the first lectures. And there you will find a link to a page which contains all of these HTML entities. But anyway, we will talk a little bit more about this later in the course anyway. The code magazine. Okay, so written in the future. Give it a save, and once again, let's reload. And as we were expecting, the visual aspect of the page is still the same as I mentioned at the beginning. So these again are just important to group the content into logical parts, which is important for semantic HTML and also for styling with CSS, as you will see in the next section. And speaking of semantic HTML, that is going to be the topic of our next video. So I hope to see you there very soon.